The country of Mexico lies on the border between the Neotropic and the Nearctic, meaning that it has a fusion of wildlife from each realm, making it the sixth most biodiverse nation on Earth, with 424 amphibians, 1,137 birds, 582 mammals, and 1,015 reptile species. Mexico's climate is possibly the most varied in the world, ranging from some of the world's hottest deserts in the north down to tropical rainforest in the south. Three large mountain ranges define the biogeography of the country, separating it into 8 bioregions, which are then further separated into ecoregions, each boasting their own unique collection of endemic species. However, the biodiversity is concentrated in the tropical south of the country and its cloud forest, largely due to the higher amount of rainfall. But unfortunately, Mexico has more endangered species than any other country in the world. There is much debate about when humans first settled in Mexico, but remains of a campfire found in the Valley of Mexico date back to 21,000 BC. The climate at the time would have been very noticeably different, with temperatures somewhere between 4 and 7 degrees cooler. With the Valley of Mexico being covered by lakes and surrounded by dense forests, it is likely humans settled there around 12,000 BC. There are several now extinct species that humans would have encountered thousands of years ago, including glyptodons, gomphotheres, and giant sloths. Although it might seem as if humans had hunted them to extinction, there is more evidence supporting the theory that the Younger Dryas cooling was responsible, as some reptiles and birds went extinct as well, even without being targeted by humans, although human hunting could have certainly played a role. With maize first being domesticated in the Tehuacan Valley 9,000 years ago, and subsequently beans, squash, tomatoes, peppers, cassava, chocolate, and pineapples, with the so-called three sisters, corn, squash, and beans, making up the vast majority of the diet. But this isn't a video about food, so why am I mentioning this? These three crops were planted next to each other, as they reduce the threat of pests and help each other to grow, meaning that a smaller amount of land is required, thus reducing the burden on the environment. Pre-European Mexico produced 5 major civilizations: the Olmec, the Maya, Teotihuacan, Toltec, and Aztec. The largest city was Tenochtitlan, which had an estimated population of 250,000 prior to colonization. The whole population of what is now Mexico was somewhere between 10 and 25 million people before the arrival of the Spanish, who first arrived in 1511, but didn't come back until 1517, where they fought a battle with the Mayan army, which was the first encounter Europeans had with a civilization in the Americas that had comparable buildings and social structure to the Old World. In 1519, the Spanish began their conquest of Mexico, and captured the city of Tenochtitlan by 1521, and killed many of the people living there, including the leader Cuauhtemoc. But it took them until 1697 to take over the Yucatan, due to there being no central authority, as the Mayan Empire had collapsed many years prior. Immediately after their arrival, smallpox and other diseases began to spread, killing over 90% of the indigenous population, who had no immunity to it. This was one of, if not the deadliest event in history, and may have contributed to the Little Ice Age, as vast areas of agricultural land in the Americas were deserted and left to grow into forest, removing carbon from the atmosphere. There is a lot we don't know, as many cities and artifacts were destroyed by the Spanish, but since then much of the country's grasslands and forests have been destroyed. However, a vast area of wilderness still remains. Mexico has 139 threatened birds, 133 threatened reptiles, 263 threatened amphibians, and 122 threatened mammals. 6 threats are largely responsible for this. Cities and urban areas cover 0.7% of the world's surface, so it is unsurprising that in a country where 81.6% of people live in cities, that this is a major threat to wildlife. Most notably, the expansion of Mexico City, which grew from a population of 3 million in 1950 to over 22 million today, has destroyed the habitat of various species. This poses an even greater threat due to the location of Mexico City, as there are a high number of endemic species found in the Valley of Mexico. The area which is now Mexico City was previously a large basin filled with water surrounded by mountains, but today almost all of the basin wetlands have been paved over, leaving the wildlife with very little habitat. One of the animals hardest hit was the axolotl, originally known as the axolotl, which once inhabited the entire basin of the Valley of Mexico, but is now only found in 3 tiny subpopulations. Between 1998 and 2008, they underwent a decline of 6,000 individuals per square kilometre to only 100 per square kilometre. In Lake Xochimilco, none were seen in a 4-month survey period in 2013, showing just how fast it declined. There could be as little as 50 left in the wild today, This decline was largely caused by three threats: habitat loss, pollution of the lake through human and animal waste, and pesticide runoff, and also the introduction of invasive fish species which eat the eggs and young. But fortunately, a captive breeding program was set up so that when the threats are removed, they can repopulate the lakes. Tlaloc's leopard frog also used to inhabit the marshes of the Valley of Mexico, but is now thought to be extinct. The other animal worth mentioning here is the grand peeping frog, known from the lava fields of Volcan Chito in the south of Mexico City, which erupted somewhere between 245 and 315 AD, meaning that it possibly diverged from the shiny peeping frog only 1700 years ago, although we don't know yet as the study of their genetics has not been undertaken. Nonetheless, it is restricted to a very small area due to the urban expansion of Mexico City. Many other species are threatened by Mexico City's expansion, such as the black-polled yellowthroat, the Mexican rail, the Mexican volcano mouse, the chunky falsebrook salamander, the black-footed salamander, Cope's flat-footed salamander, the mountain stream cyodon, volcano rabbit, and many more. The change in agricultural practices has been the main cause of biodiversity loss in Mexico. The decrease in bean consumption and the rise in demand for beef, in particular in the 1980s, caused mass deforestation, and more recently the increase in demand for avocado has threatened the remaining cloud forests, particularly in Michoacan and Jalisco. Although deforestation has considerably decreased since the 1980s, the damage has already been done. The destruction of Mexico's forests, as well as wetlands and grasslands, is the main cause of biodiversity loss, and has led to many species being listed as critically endangered or endangered, including the Mexican agouti, the Yucatan howler monkey, Barrett's tapir, and 28 other mammals, the horned guan, Oaxacan hummingbird, the red-crowned Amazon, and 17 other birds, 38 reptiles including tortoises and alligator lizards, and 148 species of amphibians, most notably the spike-thumb frogs of Chiapas, and countless salamanders. Mexico will be one of the worst hit countries by climate change, with an estimated increase of temperature by up to 3 degrees Celsius by 2060, and up to a 15% decrease in rainfall by 2090. The best example of the devastating effects this will have is the change in distribution of cloud forests, as many of them will become too dry and hot to be considered cloud forests. Due to the unique conditions of cloud forests, they give rise to specialist species that can only survive in cloud forests, such as the trilling frogs of western Mexico. Many species will not be able to survive the change in the environment and will face extinction, and others will have their range greatly reduced as a result of the climate becoming more arid and hot. In Mexico, the effects of invasive species has been documented since the arrival of the Spanish. This has already caused many extinctions, notably of endemic fish species and island-dwelling species. On Mexican islands, 12% of endemic birds and 20% of endemic mammals have already become extinct due to introduced species. On Guadalupe Island, the vegetation was all but cleared by some 100,000 feral goats until they were finally expirated in 2007. Feral cats also predate wildlife. Seabirds are particularly vulnerable to cats as they nest on the ground and evolved in the absence of mammalian predators. One species wiped out of Mexico by cats was the socorro dove, but fortunately it remains in captivity and will be able to be reintroduced after the cats are eradicated. But it was too late for the Angel Island mouse, which was completely wiped out by cats. But the most deadly invasive species in Mexico is the chytrid fungus, which causes a disease called chytridiomycosis that affects amphibians, with the disease being a major cause of the disappearance of 16 of Mexico's amphibians. Hunting threatens the country's 3 species of monkey, not by killing them, but to capture them and sell them for the pet trade. The jicatey, or the Central American river turtle, is the only living member of its family, and has had a long history of being hunted, with it being locally hunted to extinction in some areas in the ancient Mayan civilization, and is still hunted to this day despite it being illegal. In Mexico, particularly in Tabasco, where it is almost extinct after being extensively hunted, especially in the 1970s. It was so sought after that the hunters even built an airstrip to export them from Chiapas to Tabasco. Although it has been illegal to hunt in Mexico for 97 years, these laws are not enforced, and urgent action is needed if it is to be saved from extinction. If you like this video, please consider watching my other video, where I explore how animals adapted to survive on the tepuis of South America.